This video is for those of you who have an attention span long enough to see my movies to the end, and subsequently not build response videos based on arguments that are already debunked. This one goes out to AstroBrant2. Again, I'm not even gonna bother with his cheap shots, verbal masturbation, and whatever, and focus entirely on the argument. First of all, he claims to be able to use a conspiracy theorist's own videos and photos against them.
This is the second in my video project series where I use some of the moon landing hoax accusers' own choice of videos and photos against their claims.
That takes a lot of spaceballs. Let's see if he's got any to actually watch my videos the whole way through.
Jarrah White makes videos in which he tries to show errors that he or previous self-appointed investigators and Apollo skeptics have found. One of them is fall-off. This would be observed if a spotlight was used to light up the scene. His picture looks like it might indicate that. But that is not the NASA photo. This is.
Had he bothered to look at the photo more closely, he would have noticed there is indeed fall-off in this image too. Though clearly, NASA has intentionally retouched and brightened the image to somewhat remove this fall-off. Even without the false colour renditioning, you can clearly see that the fall-off is present in AstroBrant's picture. Look at the bright patch that Aldrin is standing in. And this guy claims to be able to turn a conspiracy theorist's photo against him?
Apollo photos may vary in brightness or contrast from one place to another, but not that much. I believe the deception is deliberate.
Yep, you've heard it all before. The same stale argument of a multi-Jagular. He claims that conspiracy theorists adjusted the contrast themselves and tried to pin it on NASA. Not true. If you recall previously, we managed to track down the original printing of this photo. It made the front page of the West Australian on August 2nd, 1969, the day after it was released, and it clearly shows the same darkened surface areas that we've become familiar with. Propagandists like to claim that this photo from the Apollo Lunar Surface Journal, which derived from a so-called unprocessed scan from the Johnson Space Center, is the original. It isn't. We contacted the JSC to ask when this scan was made, and they told us, "Thank you for your message. Our records indicate that the image was scanned on March 26, 2004. So much for being the original picture. Propagandists even challenged me to do what I accused NASA of doing, brightening the fall-off images to the point that they look like the so-called original JSC scan. I accepted that challenge and delivered. AstroBrant also likes throwing rover clips at his audiences and claiming the ground is evenly lit. Is it? Let's have a look at a different rover video. Does the ground look evenly lit to you? Look how bright the middle is. It looks as though there is some overhead light travelling with the car and shining down on the surface in the centre. How about this rover video? This is the 16mm feed of the Apollo 16 transverse to Station 13. The foreground is immensely brightened, but the mountains in the background are darker. So much for being evenly lit. Incidentally, what's this picture doing at 1 minute and 40 seconds into AstroBrant's video? Well, I do agree there is no fall-off present here, but it hardly belongs in a category of Apollo photographs. His next beef with me comes from objects illuminated on the shaded side. Didn't he get tired of being pwned the last time?
Hoax theorists also think they're good at analyzing shadows. They believe this picture, and essentially all others of Apollo astronauts, use secondary lighting, fill lighting. The reason he is fairly brightly lit on the shaded side is because of the bright lunar surface around him. All you have to do is look at where the shadows are to see that this fill light is all coming from below him. The upward-facing surfaces are shaded.
Astrobrand brought this up in his previous video. I didn't address it because, to be honest, I didn't feel there was any need to. My video demonstrated conclusively that a surface with a 7% albedo is not enough to illuminate the shaded side of an object. But since you asked, the argument about shadows on top of the astronauts would have been very compelling if these shadows were not so filled with light. Granted, the original release of the Buzz Aldrin photo shows a dark shadow on top, but the version Astrobrand wants you to believe is the original clearly shows it filled with light. How about this photo of Buzz Aldrin coming down the ladder? The inside of his shin and the back of his pliss are both facing up away from the surface, and away from the LEM and Neil Armstrong too. If the fill lighting is coming from the ground, how could these shadows be so filled with light? Oh wait, what's that I hear you ask? What about the Earth? Maybe the Earth shine is filling in these upper shadows. Well, that might work in low orbit, in which objects are close enough to allow the massively bright Earth to fill up the sky, but at 240,000 miles out, objects are too far away for the Earth to offer sufficient fill lighting. Phil Plait agrees, as he states on his website, "Initially, I thought the Earth was bright enough to fill in the shadows, but subsequently realized that cannot be the case. The Earth is a fraction of the brightness of the Sun, not nearly enough to fill in the shadows. So much for the Earth filling in these upper shadows." To get an idea of just how dim the Earth shine is, take a look at a crescent moon. You'll notice the dark portion is not totally black, but dimly lit. That's the reflected light from the Earth. But notice how dim it is when compared to the side of the moon lit by the Sun. This becomes even more apparent when one tries to photograph the crescent moon. In this example, the daylight side of the moon is correctly exposed. You can make out the craters and the maria very distinctly. But the night side, illuminated by only the Earth, doesn't register at all. Even brightening the image doesn't help. On the moon, the Earth shine would have exactly the same effect on these upper shadows. For the nighttime side of the moon to register on film, we would need to increase the exposure settings, as seen in this example. The nighttime side of the moon is now exposed correctly, and we can clearly make out the maria. But now the daylight side is just a wash of bright light. We can also see stars in the picture too. Remember, the night side of the moon is illuminated in this photo by the Earth, and the adequate exposure setting greatly overexposes the daylight side. So clearly, the Earth could not have adequately filled in these upper shadows. This means there is indeed a secondary light source filling them in.
If artificial lighting was being used, the shadow on the ground wouldn't be so dark and you'd be able to see his shadow in it.
Already debunked. NASA probably would have just blacked out the ground shadow prior to releasing the image.
We can see almost everything in front of him. Where is the spotlight or reflective panel for fill light? Oh, there it is. It's the ground.
How short an attention span does this guy have? We already established that these reflections in the visor were superimposed over the original image so as to hide the reflection of artificial lights.
So this false reflection must have been composited or painted in over the original image. The reflection we see in the visor cannot be that of the photographer of the image.